It was the end of April, and I was preparing for a big move all the way from Chicago to Las Vegas. In order to make the long journey a bit easier, I had hired movers to box up all my possessions and ship them directly to my new house. Meanwhile, I planned to drive myself and would turn it into a fun solo road trip adventure. The total drive was around 30 hours, so I decided to split it into 3 long days at about 10 hours each. That way, I could take my time, stop to see some sights, and relax at hotels or Airbnbs along the route. After mapping my route, I figured the first logical stopping point would be somewhere near the Nebraska/Colorado border to break up the drive into equal parts. I scrolled through Airbnb listings for the area, just needing a basic place to stay for one night before getting back on the road. Most options were pretty bare bones or expensive, since it was just rural farmland. But then I came across a listing for a small 1-story home with 2 bedrooms at an amazing price. I didn't really need 2 bedrooms, but the rate was too good to pass up. The few photos made the house look decent enough. However, I did think it was a little odd that the listing only showed pictures of 1 bedroom. You'd think they'd want to highlight all amenities. But I was only staying 8 hours, so having an extra room wasn't a big deal either way. I went ahead and booked it for the next night. The following morning, I finished packing up my car and hitting the road a bit later than I had originally planned. But I figured I could make up the lost time since there wouldn't be much traffic once I got past Chicago. The drive went smoothly, but just as I expected, night fell right as I entered the long, empty stretches of Nebraska countryside. With not even radio stations remaining, it was shaping up to be a very boring and lonely few hours in the dark ahead. Around 9 p.m., I finally pulled up the gravel driveway to the Airbnb, relieved to have arrived in the seeming middle of nowhere. The house was tucked a ways off the main highway down a dusty rural route. In the night shadows, the place looked a bit more run down than the bright listing photos had depicted. But beggars can't be choosers, I reminded myself. I only needed to crash here for the night. I grabbed my overnight bag and walked up to the front door. Most Airbnbs have a lockbox or smart lock you can access with a code. But oddly, this door just had a plain old doorknob, no deadbolt or anything. A prickle of unease passed through me, but I tried to shrug it off. Didn't seem like many theft targets way out here. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and let myself in. Despite its shabby exterior, I was relieved to find the interior looked nice and clean, very outdated. The decor was straight out of the 1960s, shag carpet, wood panels, and lime green appliances. But it was thoughtfully decorated with lovely landscape photos on the walls that gave off a cozy vibe. After poking around the quaint kitchen and living room, I felt more at ease about staying here alone for the night. I went to check out the bedroom, then immediately felt unsettled again. That door also had just a simple knob latch, no way to lock it. Maybe people living all the way out here just didn't worry about break-ins normally. Still, it was hard not to feel vulnerable. At least the second bedroom had a sturdy lock on it. I decided I'd stay in there since it seemed safest. Unpacking my bag in the second room, I noticed something that instantly gave me the creeps. Right in the wall across from the bed was a tiny low door, maybe only 3 feet high. In the darkness, it was hard to make out what was beyond the opening. I flipped the light on to get a better look. There was just a narrow, pitch-black passageway leading somewhere deeper into the house's walls. Why would anyone need such a cramped little corridor? As I stared at the small black void, I became more unsettled. Something about it felt deeply sinister. But there was no way I was sleeping in an unlocked room with that thing gaping ominously. I tried the tiny doorknob to peek inside, but found it locked from the other side. That surprised me. Why lock what seemed to be some utility access passage? I contemplated asking the host, but didn't want to cause a fuss over what was probably nothing. Just some architectural quirk of an old farmhouse. Still, I double-checked that the bedroom door locked securely before settling in for the night, with a creepy little doorway lurking in my peripheral vision. Exhausted from 10 hours of driving, I fell into a deep sleep, almost immediately. But sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke with a start. The room was pitch black and deathly silent. As my eyes adjusted, I realized what had woken me. A faint rhythmic tapping coming from right near my head. Adrenaline spiked through my body. Someone was in here. Fumbling in sheer panic, I grabbed my phone and flipped the flashlight on, waving the beam wildly around the room. But nothing was disturbed. Heart pounding, I shone the light toward the tiny door across from me. Just as suddenly as it had started, the eerie tapping noise ceased. I stared fiercely at the locked entrance, daring something to come out, but it remained still and innocuous. I was wide awake now, skin crawling with unease. Maybe it was just the house settling or tree branches blowing against the window. But my gut said someone or something was trying to get my attention. Every self-preservation instinct screamed at me to get out of there immediately. Not even bothering to pack my stuff back up, I fled the house and sped off down the dirt road under the desert moonlight. I didn't feel safe until I was miles away back on the main highway, racing towards the next town. Only then did my white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel relax slightly. I drove until I came upon an all-night diner with a well-lit parking lot full of trucks. Exhausted and still shaken, I pulled in to rest for a few hours. As the adrenaline wore off, I started second-guessing myself. Had I freaked out over nothing? The tapping could have been anything. Pipes, critters in the walls. Feeling a bit ridiculous now, I texted the Airbnb host explaining I had left in a hurry because the house creeped me out. I said someone should maybe check the property just to be safe. Then I reclined my seat back to try catching a little more sleep before dawn. When I woke up and checked my messages, I saw the alarming notification that my text to the host had been read, but he hadn't replied at all. That really unnerved me. If a guest contacted him sounding alarmed about possible trespassers, wouldn't a conscientious host respond right away to check or provide reassurance? The silence felt ominous. Had I narrowly escaped real danger back there? A chill ran through me, wondering what might have happened if I had ignored that tapping and stayed till morning. Some instincts exist for a reason, whispered in our blood through generations that survived unnamed horrors. We tamped them down at our own peril. I decided not to report the incident, still feeling unsure what I would even say. But I continue traveling only during daylight after that night, and I sleep with the lights on in motels now, comforted more by the glow than whatever might lurk in the shadows beyond. I know enough of this world to accept some mysteries can't be unraveled without inviting deeper darkness. That farmhouse held secrets behind its locked doors, which my soul recoiled from facing. And for once, I had listened without shame when fear spoke wisdom. There are far worse things than being branded a coward. It was the summer of 2023 and my boyfriend, Jack, and I were heading up to my hometown in Michigan to visit my parents for a few days. Even though we've been dating for over 2 years now, staying with my parents has always been a bit awkward. My mom can be overbearing at times and my dad snores up a storm all night long. So this time around, we decided to book an Airbnb nearby instead of crashing at their place. After searching through listings, we settled on a cute little one-bedroom condo about 15 minutes from my parents' house. The photos showed a cozy, modern interior with new appliances and furniture. It was pricier than some of the other rentals in the area, but the great reviews and amenities seemed worth it. Plus, it would be nice to have our own space during the trip. The hosts, Mark and Stacy, had dozens of glowing 5-star reviews. Guests raved about how clean the apartment was and how friendly and accommodating the hosts were. However, as I scrolled further down, I did notice a few recent reviews that gave me pause. Most complained about a problematic neighbor in the adjacent unit who made them feel uneasy. One guest said the elderly neighbor stared through her window late at night. Another reported loud banging coming from her apartment in the early morning hours. I pointed this out to Jack, but he brushed off my concerns. Every neighborhood's got their local cook, he said. I'm sure we won't even notice her. Still, I messaged Mark and asked for more details about the neighbor situation before booking. I wanted to make sure we'd be comfortable staying there. Mark replied promptly and apologized for any issues with the neighbor. He explained she was an elderly widow who lived alone and could be particular about noises in the building. However, he said he would give her a heads up about us prior to our stay so she knew to expect new guests. With a reassurance from Mark, we went ahead and booked the rental. The drive up to Michigan went smoothly, and we arrived on a sunny Friday afternoon. Mark and his wife Stacy met us at the property to hand over keys and give us a quick tour. The condo was just as modern and homey as it looked online. After unloading our suitcases, we headed over to my parents' place for dinner and drinks. My mom immediately started peppering Jack with questions about his job and family, while my dad subjected us to old stories I've heard hundreds of times. A few glasses of wine helped get me through the evening. By 10 p.m., both Jack and I were ready to retreat to our Airbnb sanctuary. We pulled into the small parking lot around 10:30, scanning for our assigned spot. There were 2 units on the ground level and 2 above with external stairways leading up to each second-story unit. Ours was on the left in the top row. But as we parked, I immediately noticed the curtains of the unit to our right rustling. Squinting up, I could make out the shadowy figure of a woman peering down at us through the window. Even from a distance, I could feel her eyes boring holes into me. It sent a chill down my spine. "I think that's our neighbor welcoming committee," Jack laughed nervously as he turned off the ignition. The elderly woman continued staring silently as we exited the car and gathered our bags. As we walked towards the stairs, I finally got a clearer look at her. She was very petite, probably no more than 5'2", and incredibly thin save for a slight potbelly. Her wispy white hair stuck out at odd angles beneath a floral shower cap, but it was her eyes that really struck me. They were wide and wild, full of what almost seemed like anger or contempt, as she watched us make our way upstairs. I had never seen someone look at me with such bitterness. It was unsettling, to say the least. We hurried up to our unit as quickly as we could with our suitcases in tow. Just as Jack went to unlock the door, I heard a creak behind me and turned to see our greeter coming up the steps. I nudged Jack to get inside faster. She said nothing as she watched us, continuing to scowl and survey our every move. Once inside with the door securely closed, we both let out a sigh of relief. What the hell was that about? She looked at us like we killed her dog or something, Jack remarked. I just shook my head, equally confused and frankly disturbed by the sinister welcome we have received. We double-checked that the door was locked before getting ready for bed. Both the crazy stare down and my mom's overcooked casserole must have taken a toll as I fell asleep quickly that night. A few hours later, I jolted awake to the sound of furious pounding. Jack sat straight up too, as we realized someone was banging violently on our front door. We froze and listened to the relentless pounding, which continued for a good minute or so before stopping abruptly. Jack grabbed his phone to check the time, 3:47 a.m. We whispered to each other, speculating who or what could be outside our door in the middle of the night. I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. Jack crept towards the front door while I trailed nervously behind him. He peeked out the peephole, then turned back to me looking puzzled. "There's no one out there," he said. He opened the door cautiously to reveal nothing but an empty walkway, but just as he was about to close it, Jack jumped back cursing under his breath. Lying right outside our welcome mat were 3 mutilated rats, guts spilling out of their severed bodies. One was so maimed it was missing its head entirely. Fighting the urge to vomit, I gasped in horror. Jack quickly shut the door and locked it once more while we tried to process the traumatic scene. Someone had left these butchered rats at our doorstep in the middle of the night. It didn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure out who the culprit likely was. Neither of us got much sleep the rest of the night. When morning finally came, I felt exhausted and on edge. As I brewed coffee, I kept peering out the kitchen window which faced the parking lot. Sure enough, around 7 a.m., I spotted the neighbor emerging from her unit. Just as before, she didn't even glance at the surroundings or cars parked outside. Instead, she kept her gaze intensely fixed on our rental the entire time as she shuffled towards it. She stood mere inches from our car, studying every detail with seemingly seething hatred. It was only when she noticed me standing at the window that her focus shifted. She jerked her head in my direction and released a horrifying high-pitched shriek, like a wounded animal. I staggered back in alarm. Seconds later, Jack came racing over to see what was going on. We watched in shock from the window as the woman let loose a crazed rampage outside. Still screaming wildly, she grabbed at her hair and pounded her fists on our car hood over and over. We couldn't make out everything she yelled, but kept shouting things like, "Get out. You don't belong here. And you need to leave right now." She was completely deranged. Jack called the cops while I recorded her on my phone in case she damaged the rental. By the time officers arrived on scene 15 minutes later, she had collapsed into a heap on the pavement next to the car. After giving our statements to police, they informed us the woman was likely suffering severe mental health issues and would be taken in for psychiatric evaluation. Mark and Stacy showed up looking mortified by everything that had transpired. They apologized profusely, refunded our entire stay, and even offered to book us a hotel room for the rest of our trip. While the ordeal had rattled us both, we declined the hotel and decided to just tough it out for the next couple nights. We never saw the unhinged neighbor again, thankfully. The police speculated she may have stopped taking important medication causing her paranoid episode. I also wonder if perhaps our arrival triggered something in her fragile state of mind. Maybe we resembled someone from her past. Whatever the cause, I'm grateful her meltdown waited until the end of our stay. The whole experience taught me an important lesson about trusting reviews. While most turned out fine, those few negative ones mentioning the troubling neighbor should have raised more red flags. When booking accommodations in the future, I plan to thoroughly comb the reviews and pay close attention to any repeat issues mentioned. You truly never know what you're walking into, even if the rest of the listing and host seem great. I'm just thankful things didn't escalate further with our unwell neighbor. She may have been disturbed, but those haunting eyes staring daggers into me will be seared in my mind forever. It was the summer of 2020 and 4 college friends, Katie, Sam, Tyler, and Robin, had just finished their sophomore years and were ready to let loose and celebrate. After months of grueling exams and late-night study sessions, they'd finally had a few months of freedom ahead of them before junior year began. The group had become close friends ever since being randomly assigned as freshman roommates in the dorms. They'd all had part-time jobs around campus during the school year, so they planned to pool their savings for an epic getaway trip together. Since none of the 4 friends had ever been to Las Vegas, they decided that would be the perfect destination for their end-of-year adventure. Initially, Katie suggested they find a cheap hotel right on the strip to stay at. But after some quick research online, the outrageously overpriced rates quickly deterred them. Most rooms were hundreds of dollars per night before fees. Tyler then brought up the idea of looking at Airbnbs instead. There seemed to be a ton of large rental homes and condos in Vegas suburbs that could comfortably fit the whole group for much cheaper. After browsing listings for a bit, they finally found a beautiful 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom house that would be perfect for the 4 of them. It had a modern, updated kitchen, backyard pool, and hot tub. All the amenities they could want. And at just $150 total per night split between them, the price couldn't be beat. They eagerly booked the house for 3 nights and began counting down the days until their Vegas getaway. Soon the trip was upon them and they met at the airport, overflowing with excitement. Their flight went smoothly and they landed in Vegas right on schedule. The Airbnb host had arranged for an Uber driver to pick them up from the airport and drop them off at the rental house. When they pulled up to the property on a street called Blackbird Lane, they were all stunned at how spacious and luxurious the house looked in person. They unloaded their suitcases into their respective rooms and explored the place. Katie claimed the master bedroom on the main floor, while Tyler and Robin took the upstairs rooms adjacent to each other. Sam was happy with the downstairs bedroom next to the backyard pool. That evening, they ordered takeout and just relaxed until heading off to bed, exhausted from traveling. The next morning, Sam and Tyler opted to sleep in and recover from the late-night arrival. But Katie and Robin, still on East Coast time, were wide awake and restless. After caffeinating, they decided to take a walk through the neighborhood to soak in the Nevada sunshine and architecture. Katie remarked, "This neighborhood seems so cute and charming. All the houses are different colors with little cactus, gardens out front. Robin nodded, adding, "Yeah, definitely not a sketchy area or anything." As they strolled down the sidewalk on Blackbird Lane, chatting away, they turned the corner, and suddenly the pleasant suburban scenery changed. Gone were the quaint houses and manicured desert landscaping. Instead, run-down shacks lined the pothole-riddled street, some with boarded-up windows and knee-high weeds growing wild. Robin muttered in disbelief, "Whoa, how did it go from nice to shady so suddenly?" Katie shook her head, equally confused by the dramatic shift. As they stood gawking, an old burgundy Buick came creeping up the road toward them with its headlights off. As it approached, it slowed to a stop directly by where the girls stood. The passenger window rolled down, and a disheveled older woman who looked to be in her 60s peered out. She had stringy grey hair and wore a tattered housecoat. With a deranged grin stretching across her face, she called out, "You two make such a lovely couple." Kitty and Robin exchanged panicked looks. "Oh, we're no couple, but thank you." Katie stammered, wanting to end this bizarre interaction immediately. Thankfully, the woman rambled on down the road without another word. The friends hurried back in the direction of the Airbnb, thoroughly creeped out by the encounter. But just as they sighed in relief at the sight of their rental house, Robin grabbed Katie's arm. "She's back," Robin whispered harshly. Sure enough, the clunky Buick had looped around and was now trailing them slowly down Blackbird Lane. Katie and Robin picked up their pace, but the stalker accelerated too, pulling right in front of the house to block their path. The disheveled woman said nothing this time. She just gazed at them menacingly through the grimy windshield, sending chills down their spines. Katie and Robin rushed inside and locked the door behind them. Within seconds, they heard the car rumble off again down the road. "That was so unsettling," Robin said, peeking out the window to ensure the woman was gone. Katie nodded. "Should we tell Sam and Tyler?" she asked uncertainly. After debating it, they decided it was best to give the guys a heads up in case that creepy lady returned. Understandably, Sam and Tyler were disturbed to hear about the bizarre encounters. The four friends came up with a plan that if the woman ever approached them again, they'd try to discreetly photograph her and the Buick's license plate in case they needed evidence later. Thankfully, the rest of their trip went by without any sign of the frightening stalker neighbor. They stayed far away from that dilapidated street and kept watch for the burgundy sedan around the Airbnb. On their final night, the Uber driver dropped them off across from the house while Katie ran in to grab her purse. As she crossed the driveway, to Katie's horror, the Buick came peeling around the corner full speed ahead directly toward her. Katie fumbled to snap a clear photo as a deranged woman leaned on the horn. Sam screamed for Katie to get inside immediately. She sprinted to the door just as the acceleration slammed the brakes right on their bumper. Thoroughly freaked out, they had the Airbnb host promptly call the police while the four huddled inside. But by the time officers arrived 20 minutes later, there was no trace of the unhinged neighbor. With no proof she intended them harm, the police could do little besides drive through the neighborhood looking for the woman or her car. The friends barricaded themselves in that final night, taking shifts sleeping and keeping watch for the stalker. At sunrise, they hauled their luggage to the awaiting Uber and left for the airport, shaken by the chilling experience with the sinister stranger. They still wonder what she wanted from them to this day. The trip taught them an important lesson about vetting neighborhoods before booking stays. While online reviews of the house itself seemed great, they realized they should have looked more closely at the surrounding area. The girls were just grateful the potentially dangerous situation with the unhinged woman didn't escalate further during their visit.